Mr Speaker, I agree with one or two things in the speech by the member for Auckland Central. Amazingly, I do. But she's right that there are some really exciting things happening in Auckland. But you know what? Most of them were begun by the last Labour government. The Rugby World Cup, secured by Helen Clark. Wynyard Quarter begun under the last Labour government. All of the improvements to the Auckland rail network and transport system, the Northern Busway, electrification of the rail network, double tracking of the Western Line, new stations at Kingsland, at Newmarket, the Newlyn upgrade, all of those things were committed and funded under a Labour government. And nothing, as David Shearer, my colleague, just said, nothing has been added to that list of achievements since Stephen Joyce became the Transport Minister under this government. Now, Nikki Kay raised the issue of this council-controlled organisations, and for the benefit of Ms Kay and for the benefit of Stephen Joyce, the Transport Minister, I want to explain and remind them why 3 government departments advised this government that the Auckland Transport Agency should not be set up as a council-controlled organisation. Treasury, the Ministry of Economic Development and the Transport Ministry all advised this government that the Transport Agency would be more accountable to the public if it was run as a unit of the Auckland Council. And all that Stephen Joyce can do in the House today is launch a nasty little personal attack on Mike Lee, suggesting that he wants to manage the day-to-day operations of the Transport Agency. Well, no one is suggesting that. The Transport Agency in Auckland that's corporatised, sir, is the only transport organisation run by a council or belonging to a council. It's the only one in New Zealand that is corporatised, and this government imposed that on a reluctant Auckland against the advice of 3 government departments because they said it would be less accountable. And if there's one issue that we've been debating for the last week in this House, if there's one issue that has jumped out of the fiasco that occurred in Auckland on Friday night, it's accountability. And day after day in this House, since the fiasco on Friday, we've seen duck shoving by this government and a refusal to stand up and take responsibility for the debacle that happened on Friday night in Auckland. Now, there are many reasons why this government should be accountable for the fiasco that happened. We had John Key standing up and putting a smiling face in front of the camera on dozens and dozens of occasions as he invited the world to come down to Party Central, a party zone that he personally selected, a tiny little strip of land on Auckland's waterfront that can hold a maximum of 15,000 people. And what does he do? Week after week for the last 2 years, he's out there exhorting the world of rugby fans to come down to Party Central. Is it any surprise that 200,000 people turned up to his party? No, it's not. It's not. New Zealanders love a party. Rugby fans love a party, and the Prime Minister's been inviting them down there. And because of the Prime Minister's advocacy for Party Central, the original plan that was put up by Auckland Council for a number of different fan zones, a number of different party zones, fell by the wayside as all the attention went on to Party Central. But where is the Prime Minister when it turns to custard? He's nowhere to be seen. Because you know what? There's no decent photo opportunity to be had when train passengers are dangerously scrambling up the bank to get out of a railway carriage that they've been locked in for the last couple of hours. That is not the kind of glamorous photo opportunity that this Prime Minister seems to like. The government has been micromanaging this issue. Their fingerprints are all over it. Only a couple of weeks ago, this government made the decision, against the advice of government officials, to make a half-day teacher-only day for Auckland schools. If they had taken that decision, 300 buses would have been freed up to run as a reserve fleet in case something went wrong with the travel arrangements on Friday night. But what did this government do? No, they rejected that advice. The upshot of that was, the consequence was, there were no spare buses in Auckland as an emergency fleet if things went wrong with the transport operation. This government made that decision, and yet we've seen day after day they have refused to stand up in this House and be accountable for it. What have they done? They've taken every opportunity to sheet the blame home for what happened on Friday night to the Mayor of Auckland, Len Brown. Len Brown, who has, of all the people in this drama, has showed a dignified, positive and constructive response. He's been willing to share his share of the responsibility for what went wrong on Friday night. Unlike this government, Len Brown's officials were working with government officials from last weekend to try and sort out the problem and work out what needed to be done to make sure another debacle didn't occur. Council officials were working from Sunday with government officials to work out what needed to happen. But what does Murray McCully do? Just like Muldoon, he calls a press conference and issues an edict. He doesn't even have the common decency to ring Len Brown and tell him what he's doing. And like some little tin pot dictator, he pretends to extend martial law over the Auckland waterfront as if he's the big man, he's taking control, he's taking responsibility. And what is he doing? He's simply enacting the same reserve powers under the Rugby World Cup legislation that the council and government officials were planning to do together in a positive and constructive way. But what does Murray McCully do? He publicly gives the elected Mayor of Auckland a slap in the face. Well, what is it with this government, sir? What is it with this government that they cannot work constructively with Auckland? Their relationship ranges from finger-wagging to lecturing to abuse. What did we see? What did we see 6 months ago? Murray McCully abusing the chair of the Auckland Regional Council on television in the media because he didn't have the social skills and the political skills to negotiate some kind of constructive agreement with the elected leadership of Auckland over what was going to happen on Queen's Wharf. That is typical of this government's relationship with Auckland. Every step along the way, the behaviour of this government has looked like a calculated insult to the people of Auckland. They've treated Auckland's elected leadership with contempt. We saw it the other day when a number of cabinet ministers sat down with the Auckland Council to give them feedback on the draft Auckland plan. And what did they say? What did they say to the Auckland Council? They said, "Oh yes, we think your plan's really good, except don't think that this ridiculous idea of having metropolitan urban limits in a compact city, don't think that's going to fly. Don't think that's going to fly. We don't support your idea of a compact city. And while you're at it, you can forget this idea of a city rail link because that's never going to get off the ground while this national government's in office." They treated the Auckland Council with contempt like a bunch of hick gangsters blowing into town and pretending that they know best. Because when it comes to Auckland, this government always knows best. And we saw that in the Super City process. We saw it with all the discussions about the CCOs, where this government insisted on corporatising Auckland Council's operations. 75% turned over to the CCOs. We saw it by the way they rammed the Super City down the throats of Auckland without giving the people of Auckland a say in a referendum. David Shearer's made the case that this government has no interest whatsoever in modernising and giving Auckland's transport system an overhaul and making it a world-class transport system. If there's one thing that we can conclude from the debacle last Friday night, it's that Auckland is desperately overdue for a modern, world-class transport system. But this government doesn't want to pay any attention to that. Every single opinion poll in the last 2 years in Auckland has shown there's one thing that Aucklanders want to see fixed by the Super City. It's public transport. And yet what is this minister doing? He's robbing every other piggy bank in the transport budget. He's robbing rural roads, he's robbing road safety, he's robbing urban public transport to fund his gold-plated roads of National Party significance. And what do they do? When he rocks up to the Auckland Council meeting a couple of weeks ago, he pours cold water on the thing that Aucklanders most want to see, and that is a modernisation of the rail system and the construction of the city rail link. Friday's debacle, sir, showed that the Auckland public transport system is antiquated and run down. We're using rolling stock that came from Perth 20 years ago. It desperately needs an overhaul. It's time this government opened its ears and listened to Auckland and learned to work constructively with Auckland. That's what Aucklanders want to see.